Hey, this is John Classic, and today we're going to complete our lesson on the walking bass line. This lesson is in two parts. The other part is about the building blocks that we use to create a walking bass line. I showed you how to play a bunch of arpeggios in the key of C, the D minor 7 arpeggio, G dominant 7 arpeggio, and the C major 7 arpeggio all over your neck. And if you want to see that lesson and all the other lessons that lead up to that, go to my YouTube channel, which is right here, and check those out. At the beginning, we started with the C major scale, and I showed you how to play the C major scale all over your neck. And then we talked about some other things, some practical application of that. And now we're getting into the arpeggios in the key of C. And so that lesson covers the specifics of the arpeggios. So watch that lesson. If you don't know a D minor 7 arpeggio or a G dominant 7 arpeggio, I would go watch that lesson. And in this lesson, we're going to apply that to create a walking bass line. So we're going to play a walking bass line over the following chord progression: D minor 7 to G dominant 7 to C major 7. And that chord progression is all in the key of C. So all the notes in the key of C are going to work. And then we're going to throw in some other things to make it sound kind of like jazz. So this is where we're going. And this is kind of what it's going to sound like when we're done. Here's a walking bass line over D minor 7 to G dominant 7 to C major 7. Okay, it's pretty simple, sounding bass line. Okay, so how do we do that? All right, here is the theoretical way to construct, like the textbook way to construct a walking bass line. This again is the theoretical, like I said, perfect way. This is just these are just guidelines. You can do whatever you want. The main rule in music as in general is if it sounds good, it is good. So these are just guidelines. Learn the rules and then break them. But let's go with the textbook guidelines for right now. A walking bass line, assuming you're in 4/4, you have 4 beats per bar. Okay, 4 quarter notes. Ba, 2, 3, 4. Ba, 2, 3, 4. These are what those 4 notes are going to be. First, the root of the chord that you're playing. Second, a note from the key that you're in, a scale tone. Third note is a chord tone of the chord that you're playing. You played the root here, so you choose another one here. The fourth note is a half step above or a half step below the root of the chord in the next bar, where you're going to start the process over again. Okay, so I know that might sound a little overwhelming. I'm just going to say it one more time. You have 4 notes, and those 4 notes theoretically are the root of the chord, then a note from the scale that's generally not a chord tone, not one of the notes in the arpeggio, then another one of the notes, another chord tone or a note in the arpeggio, and then the fourth note is a half step above or a half step below the root of the next bar. And every one of those rules that I just told you can be broken, but this is just our starting point. So let's talk about the chord progression that we're going to be walking over is D minor 7 to G dominant 7 to C major 7. Okay, so let's deal with the first chord. First chord in this progression that we're going to be dealing with is D minor 7. So why are we not, we're in the key of C, why are we not starting with C major 7? The reason I'm doing that is because this chord progression that we're dealing with is very, very common. In jazz, if we're in the key of C, it's very, very common to see the progression D minor 7 to G dominant 7 to C major 7. It's called a 2-5-1. You may have heard that term, you may not have. But it's called a 2-5-1 because the notes in C are C, D, E, F, G. Those are the first 5 notes anyway. C, D is the 2 chord, 1, 2. G is the 5 chord, 5. C is the 1 chord. So we're going D minor 7, 2, which is the 2 chord, to G dominant 7, which is the 5th chord or the 5 chord in the key, to the 1 chord, which is C major 7. So we're going 2, 5, 1. D minor 7, G dominant 7, C major 7. 2, 5. And you can hear that that's just a very, kind of a very common jazz sounding progression. You've heard that in elevators and expensive restaurants around the world. So we're going to learn how to walk over that progression. So let's take the first chord first, the D minor 7 arpeggio. Root of the chord in the key, another tone in the chord, though probably not the root, and then a half step above or a half step below the root of the chord in the next bar. So D minor 7, the first note that we hit, of course, is D. We hit the root. Then we hit a note that's in the key that we're in. We're in the key of C, so we can play any note in the key of C. Probably don't want to play one of the chord tones because we've already used that. So we want to avoid, in this case, D, F, A, or C. So that leaves us with a bunch of notes. That leaves us with E, G, B, and I'm probably missing something. But so, and the other thing that I would say is that you probably just want to pick the next note that's available in order, because walking bass lines, tend to kind of be in order. So after we hit the D, the next tone in the key that's just right in our way is E natural, okay? The third note of the bar should be another chord tone. It's probably not the root. So that, the notes in that chord are D, F, A, and C. You look, the F is just like right in our face here, just ready to be played. So that's the first 3 notes of that walking bass line over the chord D minor 7. D, which is the root, then a note that's sort of, in stepwise motion that's in the key, E, and then another chord tone, a note that's in the chord D minor 7. Then our last note is a note that is a half step above or a half step below the root of the chord in the next bar. So this is what that means. We're going from D minor 7 to G dominant 7. So we're going from D minor 7 to G dominant 7. The root of the chord that's coming up is G. So the last note of the bar that I'm playing for D minor 7 should be a half step above or a half step below G. Okay, so let me just play you what that sounds like. I'm going to review it one more time really quickly. Root, scale tone, tone that's in the arpeggio D minor 7, and then a half step above, G leading nicely to G. So that sounds like this a little bit more quickly. So the next chord in our chord progression is the 5 chord in the key of C, which is G dominant 7. So we're going to follow the same rule. We already played D minor 7, and we've now landed on the root of G. And we just follow the same rule then, which is to go root, then a note that's in the key of C, then a chord tone that's in G dominant 7. In this case, I'm playing B. And then the next chord we're going to be going to is C. So I want to play a note that is a half step above or a half step below C. Okay. So now just listen with your ears as opposed to, I don't know what else you would listen with. As opposed to listening with your mind is actually what I mean. Listen just with your ears and hear especially how that 4th note is a half step above or half step below the root of the chord coming up, and how that half step tension, because it's out of the scale generally, you're going out of the scale for a second to create a moment of tension that leads to the resolution of the chord. So just kind of hear, listen to how this sounds. We're going to be playing from D minor 7 to G to C. So I'm going to play a little walking bass line, just what we learned. Okay? Let me play that again with the chords actually going by in the background. Okay, you can hear that that sounds like jazz. That's actually a pretty cool sound, and I just followed the rule. All right, so let's finish it off by going to the last chord in this little chord progression, which is C major 7. Now the other two chords we held out for 4 beats. D minor 7 for 4 beats, G dominant 7 for 4 beats, or 1 bar. In this particular case, the C major 7, we're going to be holding out for 2 bars. Okay, so there's going to be a little bit of a difference with how we deal with that. And I'll show you when I get there. So we have 2 bars of C major 7. Of course, the first note of that first bar I'm going to hit, C natural, then a note that's in the key, then a note that's in the arpeggio C major 7. Now what do I do on beat 4? I'm not setting up a chord change, so I don't really need to do that half step above or half step below thing. So at this point I can kind of just play any note that's in that key on beat 4. So in this case I'm going to go C, D, E, F. Okay? That's 4 beats. Now I've got another bar of C to play. I'll go to, I could go to a lot of things, but in this case I'm just going to go to a chord tone that's in the C major 7 arpeggio, G, and then walk down. Scale tone, chord tone. Now I'm going to be going back to the D minor 7, so I got to play a half step above or a half step below D. So I'll play D sharp or E flat or whatever you want to call it. So again, that was, I get to the C major 7, I got 2 bars or 8 beats. In this case, I chose to play C, D, E, F, G, F, E, E flat. Now I'm back to D. So here's the whole walking bass line that we invented. Notice that every note is in the key of C except for the 4th note of the bar when I'm setting up a chord change. So here's the whole walking bass line. I'll play it first without any backdrop. Okay, now I'll play it with the chords going by in the background so you kind of hear it in context. Okay, now that you've kind of gotten an overview of some of the theoretical, ways to construct walking bass lines, just listen to me walk over the same chord progression. I played it before, but now that you have some insight into what you're listening for, I'm going to walk over this chord progression. And I'll try as much as I can to follow the rules that I laid out for you, even though in reality we would vary them quite a bit. But I'll try to, follow the same guidelines that we just talked about. I broke the rules that I gave you just a little bit, just out of habit. So now that you've kind of listened to that, I think that you can hear how, especially the things that are super clear, I think is hitting the root of the chord on 1, D, G, C, and how the fact that beat 4 almost always sets up, if I'm going from D, if I'm going to set up G on beat 4, I play a half step above it. And if I'm setting up C, I play a half step above it or a half step below it to set it up. Okay, now let me add some qualifications, and I'll play another walking bass line, and I won't try to follow the rules so much. You really don't need to follow these rules at all. You don't have to play the root of the chord on one. That, you can. I should say, you can get away with not always playing the root. You might get some dirty looks once in a while if you don't always play the root, but it depends on who you're playing with. You don't always have to play a half step above or a half step below the root of the chord coming up. Sometimes you play a whole step above or a whole step below. But the idea is that the note before the downbeat is leading to the downbeat, is leading to the root of the chord. Then the notes in between, notes 2 and 3, it doesn't have to be a scale tone, and it doesn't have to be a chord, a note in that arpeggio. The big rule is that it just needs to sound good. Hitting that root and setting up the root of the next chord that's coming up with a tone that leads to it is kind of those are the main things you have to do. The stuff in between, as long as you're in the key and kind of outlining the harmonic context of the tune and creating almost a kind of sub-melody, then you're in good shape. And that's of course what we really want to be doing, is playing like a counter melody underneath. So the way to practice this is this. You take a chord progression like the one that we dealt with, D minor 7 to G dominant 7 to C major 7, and you just make up like 10 or 15 bass lines. It might even help you to write them out on paper, so you can start to really cement the notes that are in those chords and in that key into your head. And then you learn them on the bass, and you just make as many creative bass lines as you can. At first it's going to be real slow, but pretty quickly, man, you're going to be looking at these chords, and it can be very easy for you to construct walking bass lines. It'll, in a matter of weeks, you'll be walking through chord progressions pretty easily. So let me just do one more, just to give you an idea of maybe how it might sound more in the real world. See, I'm not really following the rules as strictly as instead of thinking about the rules, I'm more thinking about just kind of playing in the key, outlining, kind of cheating towards outlining the arpeggios, and making sure I set up that next chord and kind of trying to create an interesting melody. That's ultimately where you want to be going. But the starting point is to learn to discipline your fingers and your mind to play the strict outline of a walking bass line. So until next time, have fun playing bass.